Turn it over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Dallas. Hey, everyone. I'm on the safety team, among other things. And this month, I'm going to talk a little bit about the planer. It's a tool we all like to use. And so we have a kind of a nice set of planers, and we have them set up with these Wixie planer thickness meters. So that makes our planers a little bit unique if you don't have those at home and you use these give us a little bit of extra, I guess, capability. So just generally the planer, we're going to talk a little bit about safety for the planer. But I thought we ought to look at a little picture about what is actually going on under the hood, because it's a black or green box in our case. And I didn't really realize besides the in-feed rollers and the out-feed rollers and the kickback pawls, that we actually have a little chip breaker on the front and a pressure bar behind the cutter head. But generally, the things that are mostly involved in the safety is the feed system, which is the drive in-feed roller on top and the out-feed roller on the back, and then the support rollers under, and then the safety pawls. Those are kind of the main safety things added to a planer. And those things are helping provide a lot of safety, but it is an open space. So the number one key thing is we keep our hands out of that planer interface, and we don't count on those kickback pawls. It's like we want to expect the best, but plan for the worst, which is the safety pawls. We expect them to hold the wood and prevent a kickback, but we should plan for our kind of work around that they might not work, so we're not going to be in that way there. So let's see, the kind of things you get. If you do put your hand in, there's a pretty big risk that you can get a pretty severe injury. But probably the more common injury that you might not expect is if even if you're staying away from the opening, the wood can get a kickback, or it could come apart, and therefore pieces come back out. So materials coming back out of the front of the machine back kind of at you is a pretty big risk, and that can give you some potentially eye injuries if you're down there trying to see what's happening. That's a pretty big risk and something we want to avoid. So what are the to-dos? We have a little safety technique, which is the first thing we have is the digital readout. So we can measure our board and figure out where it's thick, what its thickness is, and that'll help us set our first cut, which is a good practice to measure your thickness all around the board and then use that as your reference point. And then we like to do it where we only have one turn or one half turn of the crank kind of get started. That's really to make sure we're not overloading the system, because one of the things that can happen is you take too big of a cut. First, you're going to put a lot of stress on the system, but second, it could basically stop and not be able to drive it. And that's sometimes a risk that people say, oh, my wood's stuck, and they try to push it or move it, and that's really the other thing. If we start off with we know what we're starting with, and we only do a half a turn, we should have good control over that wood going through there. And if it does have a problem, we want to basically turn it off before we try to address that problem. And then if you do have a big piece you're trying to put, we have access here for a lot of roller stands. We got a window here, Jeff. But we have roller stands and you use those if you have a long piece. So what don't we do? This is our temptation that we should avoid, which is to try to plane cross grain. Why is that a risk? If you think about that, the wood fibers are up, and those cutters are peeling them, can peel a big chunk away, and then it can throw it back at you. That's the safety risk, is that it's going to take a chunk of your piece and throw it back out the input side. And we don't want to force things. We don't want to, we don't want to stand behind the planer, and we want to make sure we don't put a piece that's too short. If you get a piece that's too short, if you go back and look at it, and we get a piece that's shorter than the distance between those rollers, the input and output rollers, that piece becomes loose inside the planer against the cutter head, and it can it can take a dance that's very unfortunate. So we want to make sure we pay attention to the minimum thickness, and we have guidance to say don't go less than a 1/4 inch too. You're getting down pretty thin. The risk there is that the planer can take it apart if it gets too thin. And you can switch to thicknessing with the drum sander if you have something thin like that. So one last thing, don't try to make an adjustment during your cut. That's kind of a safety guideline. If it's bogging down, you can either wait to get through or you can turn it off, but don't try to adjust it in the middle. So that's it for safety on the planer. We'll post these things up, by the way. We're going to try to incorporate these into some sort of link. When you go to the each piece of equipment, we'll have a little barcode, a QR code, where you can click on it, and we'll be able to get access to a lot of this info if you're right there at that machine. So look forward to that someday. All our placards are going to get updated, so you'll have a barcode you can actually QR code scan and learn more.